Welcome. We're going to dive into a question that seems so simple on the surface, but is actually one of the biggest puzzles in architecture. You've got a piece of land, so where exactly do you put the building? Think of it like a high stakes detective story, and in this explainer, you and I are going to solve it together. Okay, so picture this. You've got this beautiful plot of land. What's your first instinct? Probably to build right in the middle, right? Or maybe up on that little hill with the amazing view. It seems, well, obvious. You just pick the spot that looks the best. But here's the twist. In architecture, that first intuitive answer, it's almost always the wrong one. In fact, picking that so-called perfect spot could turn into an absolute disaster. The real answer is hidden, and our job is to uncover it. You see, architects aren't just looking for a nice spot. They're on the hunt for what's called a defensible location. Now, what's that? It's a spot that can be justified against a whole bunch of invisible forces. A location that works not just because it looks good, but because it's legally, environmentally, and financially sound. And to find this defensible spot, you need clues. A lot of them. Think of these as our case files. Site surveys, they define the property lines. Geotechnical data, that tells us what's hiding underground. And environmental reports and legal documents, they draw invisible lines all over the property. The solution isn't in any one of these files, it's right at the intersection of all of them.
All right, let's start digging into our first set of clues, starting with the most physical thing there is, the ground itself. The shape of the land and what's just beneath the surface, well, they hold some of the most important secrets.
First up is topography, which is really just a fancy word for the shape of the land. And that shape has huge consequences. Water always flows downhill, right? So if you build in a low spot without a plan for drainage, you're basically asking for a flooded basement. And building on a steep slope, that means a way more complex and expensive foundation. The land itself really sets the basic rules of the game. Okay, next we have to look even deeper at the soil. What's it made of? Hitting solid bedrock is fantastic news. It means your foundation can be simple and shallow. But if you find clay, that's a major red flag. Clay soil expands when it gets wet and shrinks when it dries, and that movement can literally crack a building's foundation in half. This one clue can make or break an entire project's budget. And this quote just hits the nail on the head. Geotechnical data, all that info about the soil, it isn't there for creative inspiration. It's a set of hard limits. It tells you where you cannot build, or at least where it would be incredibly foolish and expensive to even try. It starts shrinking that map of possibilities right from the get-go. So once we've figured out what the ground is telling us, we have to look at the next layer of clues, the environmental constraints. These are basically nature's own rules, and they act like giant do not enter signs on your property. Now here's a classic trap people fall into, mixing up wetlands and floodplains. A wetland is a strict no-go zone. For all intents and purposes, you just can't build there. Full stop. But a floodplain is different. It's a conditional zone. You can build there, but you have to follow very specific rules, like raising the building way up, and you're accepting a certain amount of risk. Confusing these two can make a project totally unworkable. And get this, here's a stat that might shock you. When you put down buildings and parking lots, rainwater has nowhere to soak in. Managing all that runoff is such a massive issue that on some projects, up to 70% of the entire site can be taken up just by things like detention ponds and drainage systems. That one requirement can dramatically shrink the area where the building can actually go. Now, if there's any risk of past contamination, say the site used to be a gas station, there's a whole formal process. Phase 1 is basically historical research and a site walk. If that raises any red flags, you move to Phase 2, which involves actually taking samples and testing the soil. But here's the architect's role in all this. They don't decide how to clean it up. Their job is to take the scientist's remediation plan and cleverly weave it into the site design. Maybe that means putting a parking lot over an area of contained soil. Okay, so we've read the land and we've respected nature's boundaries. Now for the really tricky part, the invisible legal fences. These are the abstract rules that you can't see, but they are incredibly powerful and they crisscross every single piece of property out there. You've basically got three main layers of these rules. First, there's zoning. That's the public rulebook from the city, and it tells you things like setbacks, how far back from the property line your building has to be. Then you have covenants. These are private rules, maybe from a homeowners association, that control things like what your house can look like. And finally, easements. These are legal rights of way that let, say, the utility company run power lines across your yard, and you definitely can't build under those. So what happens when all these rules conflict with each other? Let's say the city zoning code requires a 10-foot setback, but a private covenant for the neighborhood demands 20 feet. Which one do you follow? Well, the answer is simple and a little unforgiving. You always have to follow the most restrictive rule. You don't get to pick the one you like better. This is what ultimately carves out your final true buildable area. And just when you think you've finally solved the puzzle, the most boring, mundane things can have the final say. Where are all the cars going to park? And, this one's critical, can a fire truck actually get all the way around the building in an emergency? I'm willing to bet the turning radius of a fire truck has determined the location of more buildings than any grand architectural vision ever has. So now we have all of our clues. We've got the soil conditions, the environmental red flags, those invisible legal fences, and the practical needs for access. It is time to put it all together and finally find that one single defensible spot.
The final choice, wherever it is, has to pass this checklist. Is the grading and drainage going to work? Yes or no? Are we respecting all the environmental constraints? Yes or no? Are we satisfying every single legal limit? Can cars and fire trucks get through? And is the foundation going to be affordable? If and only if you can answer yes to all of these, you found your spot.
And really, it all boils down to this single idea. Site selection isn't about finding the perfect spot, because honestly, that rarely exists. It's about finding the one location that solves the most problems with the least amount of friction. It's a solution you arrive at, not a beautiful spot you just discover. So the next time you're out and you see a new building that seems like it's in a kind of an odd place, don't just see the building itself. See all those invisible forces that pushed and pulled it into that exact spot. What story is the land, the law, and plain old logic telling you? What piece of this amazing puzzle can you now see?